Sara, we just interviewed an artist who built a really interesting solar-powered sculpture out on the playa at Burning Man, which is its own art institution. Why do you think that the art world, as well as like the media, sort of does not think of Burning Man as the art institution that it really is when you go there and visit it?
I think it comes down to gatekeeping. I think that, I think it's the same reason why certain, artists within the digital art world are ignored. The traditional art world is a very strong system. There's rules. It's a 19th century system, and there's a lot of gatekeeping involved. I mean, you guys know this from your agency work. Who's the gallery? What museums are they in? These are the questions that get asked. And so some creators are left out of that. Burning Man I have not been, it's not my thing, but that's okay. I've heard it's incredible, and I've seen some of the art coming out of there. It's apples and oranges, and because there's not a market force behind it, it gets cast into a different plane.
Hello and welcome back to the MO podcast. My name is Jonathan Neal and I'm here with my co-host Joey Flores. And today we are extremely excited to welcome Sara Fitzmaurice to the podcast. Some of you who are in the art world will undoubtedly recognize her name, but for those of you who aren't, Sara is the founder and CEO of FITZ CO, which is probably the premier cultural strategy and communications agency in the art world, if not beyond. She started the company in 1995. In full transparency, Sara and I met almost 20 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than 20 years ago, which seems kind of unbelievable. Probably around 2005. Her offices were on 23rd Street in the heart of Chelsea, just at the moment of that neighborhood's kind of ascendancy. I was a mere lowly art critic, but one of Sara's superpowers is cultivating people and networks, which she does expertly. And now 20 years later, well, we're here. I could say that even by 2005, she and her firm were already considered one of the, if not the go-to shops in public relations and communications in the arts. Perhaps most notably, since 1996, she has represented Art Basel, one of the most recognizable brands in the arts, and in no small part due to Sara's direction and intelligence and talents. But her firm now advises everyone and everything from artist studios to arts centers, museums, and major brands who are looking to make their name in the arts, including things like BMW and LG. And I imagine there'll be other sort of major players on the scene. One of the things that I've always enjoyed about Sara too is her interest and curiosity in new technologies, which has brought her into advising in the Web3 space in the last couple of years as well, which I think is something that many people who have gained her stature and experience wouldn't even touch. And Sara jumped in with both feet. And so we're excited to talk about that, about FITZ CO, and about the art world in general, and much, much more. So Sara, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Wow, Jonathan, thanks for that great introduction. I'm excited to talk with you both. Thank you for including me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I do want to go to a little bit of the origin story, just to set the scene for some of the people who may know FITZ Co, may know your name, may know some of the things that you have done, but I don't think that, it's not always that everybody gets to hear about how the firm and you got your start in the art world and in the business that you've now come to dominate. So give us a little bit of a background on the origin story of the firm and your sort of intro into it.
So the origin story goes back a good number of years, and if we can travel back in time to 1995, this was a pre-internet art world. For those of you who remember that, pre-email, pre-internet, very bricks and mortar. And at our core, going back to the founding, FITZ Co has always been a strategy agency for the art world and brands that touch the art world. And this goes back to our earliest days. Even in my my early 20s and into my mid 20s when I started the agency, I had a very clear vision for problem solving and building a roadmap for how to get from A and B and how to get from A to B. And I was also a very grounded and calm thinker. And that probably came out of my family. Those were just sort of naturally how I was. I was also quite a good storyteller, and sales came quite naturally to me, whether selling a PR strategy to a potential client, or let's call it selling a story to a journalist or a writer. I studied art history, but I was always commercially minded. And in our earliest days of FITZ CO, we always worked with corporate clients. And you mentioned the curiosity around getting into the Web3 space. I would say that was in our early days, the interest in the nonprofit and the for-profit clients alike. And that was quite unusual then. So we worked with everything from Museu Serralves in Porto to Celebrity Cruise Lines, which had a corporate art collection. And you may wonder how those two things come together. But the commercial side of the art world has always been just as important to me, whether it's galleries, auction houses, art fairs, or brands that want to be in the world of art. And our competitors in those early years wouldn't touch a brand the same as I think many didn't start touching the Web3 space until just recently. And they certainly wouldn't touch a gallery or art fair or auction house. So I saw a gap and I filled it. And we've always been the entire ecosystem coming together under our umbrella of client services, and that continues to be an interest today.
Nice. Yeah, I think I was just recently having a conversation with a colleague about we date the kind of the birth of the internet, or the sort of commercial public facing internet, to right around 1995 with the release of Netscape and these user interfaces that allowed a public to engage with the internet through these browsers. But things were still so analog for another decade. I mean, I think back to, probably right around 2004, 2005 was when, it became a little bit more post.com boom and bust, became a little bit more ubiquitous for people. And even thinking about, it took it really until the sort of introduction of the iPhone and the iPad and tablets and things like that for the sort of full engagement through online to really take hold. But those early decades were pretty, they're pretty slow moving if I think back on what it looked like.
Yeah, I remember the fax machine in my studio apartment on 14th Street in my first years working when I was a sole practitioner, and the faxes we were doing Bill Viola at the Venice Biennial, the PR for Bill, which, James Cohan explained to me what video art is as we started working with Bill. And I remember the fax machine rolling in with overnight faxes coming in from Venice. And this was not a plain paper fax either. It was the old
those like film papers.
Yeah. So the art world, and indeed the world, has changed so dramatically, and we have tried to change and grow with it. You gotta keep pace.
In your opinion, Sarah, just to go back to those sort of those first years, given that you were already bridging the gap between the nonprofit and the commercial, which I can also attest was a very big yawning chasm in the late 90s and even into the early 2000s. The market was regarded mostly as a four-letter word. What in your experience or opinion was the thing that sort of began to shift those attitudes? And when did you see those attitudes towards the commercial versus the nonprofit begin to shift in your ecosystem and in your work?
Probably it's got to come down to money. I mean, there used to be this sort of vibe of, we don't talk about money, we don't talk about the market. And that just started to change because it had to. The market became more powerful. It's a force. The market became much more forceful. It became more expensive to run institutions and nonprofits. I think fundraising used to be very discreet, very quiet. It can't do that anymore. It's extremely expensive to run a museum, even a encyclopedic museum in a smaller city. It's very, very expensive. And so I think the market spoke. Also, just generally in our culture, consumerism of all kinds, luxury products. I mean, look at, I don't know, when we were first working in the art world, not to sound, ancient or anything, but there just wasn't as much stuff to buy, right? Like, what could you buy as a young person working in New York? Now, like, what can't you buy? So there's a dramatic shift just in culture in general. And the art world is no exception. I think the 2008 financial crisis also had impact on the market, because we saw what happens when the market falls apart and how much is lost. So I think that's a pivotal moment as well, but it certainly predates that in a significant way. And then there's other events that just made the market undeniable. Historic auctions, the launch of Art Basel in Miami Beach in 2002, was meant to launch a year earlier, of course, but 9/11 interrupted that. You can't really deny that is a place where interesting things are happening. Interesting artists are being discovered. Collectors and museum people are flocking to network and socialize and make discoveries. And, the world around that art ecosystem needed to catch up with that.
Sara, is there something that, if you compare your earliest days launching the firm, or even your personal work before the firm, and now, is there something you miss about the way that either PR worked back then, or the way that the art market or the art world operated back then? Is there something that you just sort of, you're nostalgic about that doesn't seem to be the case anymore?
The fax machine.
Definitely not the fax machine. Yeah, I think there's a few things, and I'll add a caveat. The art world definitely used to be a small town. It was a very, very small community. One of the upsides of being a small community is you had very intimate experiences and meaningful interactions with people. The downside is it was very exclusive. It was not inclusive at all, and I'm glad that has changed. It's much, much more inclusive. And you see a much wider range of people participating in the world of art, which I think is fantastic, overdue, and much needed. I'm doing a lot of work in the digital art space. It does have that small town flavor still. You go to key events, you see the same people again and again, you have meaningful conversations, you'll have a conversation, you'll pick it back up, a month later at the next thing. And I've really been enjoying that, whether it's a conversation with an artist or with a builder or a collector. So I think that's a fundamental thing that has changed in our more global art world. But again, it comes with tremendous upside, and I wouldn't send us backward by any stretch.
What about the way, has the way to approach PR changed a lot over these 25 years?
The way to approach PR has fundamentally changed. Again, the same that our world has changed. When I was early days in my company, there were basically two channels that we activated, probably three, but two main channels that we activated for a PR strategy. One, of course, was media relations, which is, sort of the bread and butter. But the other one for us, which again goes back to our founding, was the network piece, the one-to-one opinion leader engagement piece, which again for our competitive landscape was quite different. And now it's multi-channel, right? You have social media, event marketing, experiential marketing, earned media through editorial. The network continues to be absolutely key and vital. And I think people are still playing a little bit of catch up with the power that they have within their own organization to do really, really effective PR and marketing with a strong strategy and a strong leader because of content that they own. So putting out your own content, whether it's an artist video or an artist talk. I was shown this app the other day that the person that shared it with me put his CV into the app and it spit out a podcast about him. in AI. It was absolutely fascinating. I'm like so interested in AI right now. Artists working in AI, the power of AI, what can we do with AI? Obviously, it's has a lot of concerns and risks as well, but like any tool, it depends how it's used and who uses it. So I'm encouraging our clients to really look at this expansive media and marketing model so that they can most effectively move the needle to where they want it to move, whether it's a nonprofit expanding audiences, bringing in new audiences, or fundraising or selling tickets, or a for-profit making art sales or driving new revenue streams. We have to look much broader than just a media clipping. It's always has to come back to what is this in service of, and is there now a better way to do it that complements the editorial media?
How is AI going to upend the way that you work, both positively and negatively?
It's already upending the way that PR firms work, and I think again we have to be careful. I know some media outlets do not want to take press materials that are generated by AI. We still rely on the old-fashioned good writers in our agency that have art history degrees that can write. That's a critical skill coming out of our agency. To us, AI is a tool. It's a collaborative tool. It could be research. It could be doing an early draft of kind of a rough deck layout, but you have to collaborate with it, and you can't be lazy about it. You can't just stick something in and get something back out and go with that. So I think it's about harnessing that power and not relying on it too heavily. So again, a balancing act. Out there in the broader world, it will absolutely take jobs. I mean, customer service jobs are going to be gone. That doesn't necessarily impact the art world, but these call centers, that's going to all be gone. So I don't know, I don't know what that does. I'm not an economist or have that skill set. I'll let somebody else figure out those challenges of AI. But for what we do, I look at it as an opportunity and an enhanced tool that we can leverage, but not fully rely on.
But for example, if you had, and again, this is just conjectural, but let's say you've got 5 people that you are relying on to sort of generate good copy for communications of one sort or another, be they press releases or pitch decks or things like that. And AI is able to do a better sort of first draft for much of that material. And who knows? I mean, again, we're still in such early days, so I'm of the opinion that with the next release that comes out of ChatGPT and OpenAI, you may get something that's even a better than just first draft. But pretty soon you just need one person who is prompting the chat window to generate these things, and then you just need someone who's a pretty exceptional editor to go through all of the work of those what at one point had been 5 people with art history degrees. Do you see, I mean, and this is coming from someone who is an art writer who has an advanced art history degree, so I, arguing to a certain extent for my own obsolescence, even though I've spent 20 years as an editor, so maybe I've got a little bit of a leg up on someone who's a little bit more freshly minted. But I certainly see that as a sort of 2 things. One, it can make a shop more efficient, right? Because you can do a similar amount of work with fewer people, but it also means that you can expand, right? It means that those 5 people now aren't sort of spending time generating initial copy. It means that that's potentially 3 more clients that can be managed effectively. How do you see the balance happening there? Is there a capacity for expansion? Is that going to be harder for firms where it's going to be much easier just to sort of eliminate some personnel to begin with? What's the trade-off there?
I think that the big touch point is the personal connection. There is no trading off. I mean, we don't have, and I don't know if other firms do, but we don't have 5 people that just sit and write press releases. It's a multi-skill set. And there is no replacing that personal connection. So being able to, being a PR professional that has a relationship with, the Jonathan Neal of today that can pick up the phone and say, hey, Jonathan, I really think you're going to like this because I know what you're interested in. I want you to come along. I want you to see it. And I want you to tell me what you think. You can't replace that. That's relationship driven. At the end of the day, PR is about nuance. It's about relationships, and it's about moving the needle for the clients. And you can't do that exclusively through AI. AI is a tool. I mean, remember when, a gallery would send out an 8x10 or, a 4x5 transparency or an 8x10 transparency. As PR firms, again, like one of our earliest projects was Bill Viola at the Venice Biennial, we had a stack of 8x10 glossy portraits of Bill. He looked amazing to hand out to journalists to run with newspaper articles. So I'm convinced that we were having some of these conversations in past years. Obviously, the acceleration with what can happen with AI, but how do you stay relevant in the PR job market? You make sure that you have personal relationships, because yes, if you're just the person in the back room that's, only doing generative things that can be replaced by AI, probably with all jobs, it's going to transition and change, but it will change to something else. And I'm not sure what that is. And one of the things I always tell young people that work with us is build your network. Like, look around this room, look around the galleries, the museums, identify your peers, make relationships with them, because in 10, 15 years, they're going to be the museum director, the owner of the gallery, the senior person in your space. This is your cohort. So nurture those relationships and grow up with them. You and me, that's how we are here
Sure.
today. How many examples do we have of, I'm thinking of a colleague who now leads a prestigious nonprofit on the East End of Long Island. She was a secretary, literally called the secretary, in a gallery for the owner, and now she leads a nonprofit, and we met in probably 1995. So that's what's not replaceable by AI or anything like it.
Mm-hmm.
Sara, I want to go back to the early days of FITZ Co. What was the project or client that put the firm on the map?
Probably it was Bill Viola at Venice, and that was, I think, our third project client. It was not at all profitable, which is fine, but it was an incredible experience, and that's how I met Sam Keller, who was at Art Basel. And, when we started working with Art Basel in 1996, it was a regional Swiss art fair, and, helped grow it into the mega brand that it is today under the leadership now of CEO Noah Horowitz. Venice is the Olympics of the art world. It's the world stage. We met scores of journalists, some of whom are still at, we work at Venice regularly, some of whom still cover Venice biennial projects. I think that was the one, because that was the world stage and opened up a whole panoply of opportunities.
Who was the commissioning body for Viola at that point?
It was Arizona State University, which at that time it was the art museum at Arizona State University, and Marilyn Zeitlin was the director curator, and she commissioned Bill. And in 1995, Bill Viola was not that well known. Video art was not that well understood, and it was a very bold choice by Marilyn to put it forward, and indeed by the committee to select Bill. And I'll note that he just passed away recently, and I'm so grateful that I saw him. I think about a little over a year before he passed away, and he really had a very meaningful impact on our agency and my life's work to date with his partner Kira Perov.
Yeah, I can imagine trying to communicate the value and the import of video art even in the mid-90s, as I recall. I think the museums had just begun to collect works of video in the early 90s. And this was kind of at the same moment there was a kind of not a resurgence, but there was a new turn in in contemporary artists using video in new and interesting ways. Obviously, sort of like Matthew Barney, I'd say in 1992, 1993 was one of the things that sort of brought working in video back into a kind of broader consciousness. And then the museums began to bring it into their collections, and all of a sudden there was a kind of burgeoning sense that, oh, this thing is here to stay and maybe there's going to be a market for it. But I can still remember, even when I arrived in graduate school in the late 90s, and this was at Columbia with people like Rosalind Krauss and Benjamin Buchloh, who were still looking down their noses at people like Bill Viola and others. So that must have been an uphill battle.
Yes, I think it was. And for me, I think that's why I was so open and early to, what in 2021 was called NFT, NFT art, which still today people are like, aren't NFTs over? That moment has passed. There was a crypto winter and that's finished. I'm like, no, it's not. This is just another medium, whether it's an NFT or AI art or generative art or gaming art. It's just another medium. And the resistance of the traditional art world to dig in and understand this community of creators, builders, collectors is truly astonishing to me. And I think it relates to not being in a comfort zone, because we can't experience or discover artists of the digital age that are working outside of the gallery and art fair system. We can't discover them on the platforms and in the ways in which we're normally comfortable doing that. We're not going to see this work when we come to the art fairs that are about to start in London and Paris. We're going to see very little of it, if any. We can't see it when we walk through Chelsea or Tribeca, et cetera. So people in the traditional art world don't know how or where to discover. They haven't seen enough of the work, so they can't discern what is this, how does it fit in. It's really trying to understand an entirely new market and an entirely new ecosystem. And these two operating systems of the digital art world and the traditional art world almost are at odds. And I've been super interested in building bridges between these two communities. And shout out to Pablo Rodriguez Fraile, who's a client and a friend who first got me into this space when he presented Rafiq Anadol on the beach in Miami Beach. I don't know if either of you were there, but walked out on Miami Beach in front of Faena and saw this massive screen and literally people staring agog at Rafiq Anadol's work. And for me and for many, many other people that night, it was the first time I had ever seen the work. And that really got me hooked. And then we started consulting to Ryan Zur, who's a visionary collector in the space, who bought Beeple's Human One. So we've been working with Ryan on the world tour of Human One, which is going to the Jeju Museum in China coming up in November. So it's been this incredible journey to get to know this entirely new ecosystem with a whole cast of different players.
Sara, while we're on the subject of ecosystems that the traditional art world either doesn't value or doesn't respect or doesn't pay attention to, we just interviewed an artist who built a really interesting solar-powered sculpture out on the playa at Burning Man, which is its own art institution. And if I don't know if you've ever been there, but I went once, and it's just mind-blowing, the amount of art there, the scale of it, the amount of money people invest in it seemingly for no return whatsoever. Why do you think that the art world, as well as like the media, sort of does not think of Burning Man as the art institution that it really is when you go there and visit it?
I think it comes down to gatekeeping. I think that, I think it's the same reason why certain, artists within the digital art world are ignored. We are a very strong system. The traditional art world is a very strong system. There's rules. It's a 19th century system, and there's a lot of gatekeeping involved. And, and I'm part of that 100%. I am absolutely part of that, as are, agencies like mine, as are galleries, art fairs, museums. And without that imprimatur of, are they with a gallery? I mean, you guys know this from your agency work. Who's the gallery? What museums are they in? These are the questions that get asked. And so some creators are left out of that. How many times have we been at a biennial or an art fair and we walk around and we talk to people about what they've seen that's great, and they're listening as opposed to seeing? Are you looking at art and making your own decisions, or are you listening to what the collective is telling you? And Burning Man is, I have not been, it's not my thing, but that's okay. I've heard it's incredible, and I've seen some of the art coming out of there. From the traditional art world, it's a different thing. It's apples and oranges, and because there's not a market force behind it, it gets cast into a different plane.
If Burning Man came to you and said, we think it's crazy that the art world doesn't pay attention or respect what we do here. We think, some of these artists are, just as talented as, and they're building sculptures just as big as the biggest Jeff Koons sculptures, and they're doing all these things. And we want to work with you. And specifically, we want to have our perception elevated in the world of fine art. Is that a challenge you would take on?
We already are taking on that challenge with the digital art world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are doing that. We are doing that every day already. So yes, that is a challenge that we would take on. But also, I would go to why. Why do you want to be in the traditional art world? The traditional art world is my home, so I'm comfortable saying this because it is my home. It is filled with people that I am very close with. It is where my business success came from, and yet I'm willing to acknowledge that it's a closed system. And again, I'll reflect back to you all. I'm sure you see this with the artists you're putting out into the world through your agency. I mean, we did Ryan Zur, we work with Ryan Zur, the collector, and Ryan is a champion major collector. He's on the Art News Top 200 list for the second time this year. Very passionate collector, extremely articulate about art, and has the one-of-one collection. And there's an artist that he's a champion of called Sam Spratt. Have any of you heard of Sam Spratt? We encouraged Ryan to contemplate mounting a show of Sam Spratt during the Venice Biennial. I said, Ryan, if you want this category of artists to start to get the recognition they deserve, we have to meet the art world where they are. What better place than the Venice Biennial? So with his curator, Lucas Amateur, the community of me and them and many others put up an exhibition by Sam Spratt that was absolutely beautiful. It was at the end of the Arsenale, very deep, very thoughtful, incredible physicals and digital work. And it got some great press and some great people came, but the amount of resistance to get people from the traditional art world to go see this, I found extraordinary. The lack of curiosity, the lack of what's happening? Now, I get that during the Venice Biennale opening, it's incredibly rushed, time is short. But to me, that's one of the exciting things is discovery. So I wonder if that sense of discovery, if it's been dimmed a little bit somehow. I'm not sure. I'm not sure why there was a lack of curiosity or sense of discovery, but the people that did come loved it, and there was incredible feedback, and we'll see what's next for Sam. That's the other interesting thing. If it was a hot painter that had a show, I think a gallery would have picked them up. It's curious. I don't have the answer, but it's curious.
Your metaphor of the art world being your home and the sort of gatekeeping makes me think of you're accept these challenges, but you're but maybe we'll just have maybe we'll do this event offsite. Or maybe maybe we'll set up the garage for a little while, and you can hang out there, and we'll see how everybody thinks about it as they go through.
Exactly.
Which I totally understand. But it was there was a moment that was like, oh yeah, that sounds like the way that people at Venice might be approaching it. They're like,
Yeah,
wait a second, who are you inviting into our house here? That seems like,
exactly.
who gave you
Yeah,
permission?
a little
Um,
subversive.
well, it's interesting because I think that you are in a unique position because you have a lot of these conversations across the board with institutions, with artists, with collectors, and the clients that you have are concerned with achieving certain types of recognition and attention. And I've often talked about this as kind of there's two different economies to the art world. There's this sort of conventional economy that is budgets and numbers and wanting to be able to reproduce a creative practice or to keep an organization afloat. And so you have revenue and you have expenses and things like that. But there's this sort of adjacent economy that is not correlated entirely one-to-one with that more conventional economy, which is the attention economy, right? And recognition. And it creates it's a different set of dynamics when you're trying to, one, create visibility, but I think more than just visibility, to sort of create recognition for an artist or for an organization or for someone. And that demands a different sort of entry into people's minds, right? And it demands a different type of story that they begin to have. So one that I would think about it this way, rather than one that they simply take note of, one that they are sort of willing to tell to other people and reproduce themselves coming out of their own mouths. What is the way that you approach that particular problem, right? Like, it's one thing to have a story that you've created, let's say for Sam Spratt or for Ryan Zern, and that you are able to tell on their behalf. But it occurs to me that the way that you really achieve success is when people sort of take that story that you have crafted and make it their own, such that they are going to retell it with their own embellishments or their own investment, so that it extends and replicates and begins to achieve a certain level of traction. And that's a difficult thing to do, because it's like the difference between the press release, which is the story that the museum wants to tell and that the gallery wants to tell, that the artist wants to tell, and the thing that a critic writes or that someone else explains to a group of friends over cocktails or dinner later on that day or a month later or wherever it might be. So what are some of the what's the way how do you approach that challenge? Because it still seems like an incredibly difficult challenge to surmount.
I think it comes back to the multi-channel effect. Again, what we're trying to do is go from point A to point B for whatever it is. We want to grow audience. We want to attract new donors. We want to sell art to more people. We want our artists to be more loyal. We want brand cachet for our brand by being involved in the art space. So how do we get from point A to point B? And unlike when I started, which I referenced at the top of the conversation, now we have multi-channel. We can go one-to-one conversations. We can go editorial media outreach, which includes, yes, a press release, yes, trying to get a critic to come and write about it. We can go social media. We can go podcast. You have to shape this whole paradigm together and weave it into one strategy to really move the needle. And also to know where we're going. The number of clients that come and say, we want press. I'm like, why do you want press? For what?
Right.
What are you trying to do? And then when you try to get them to think deeper, it's like, you want that. Well, you're not actually going to get that through press. You're going to get that through whatever, building out a network of people that you don't know. Or doing an event or doing owned content, or what you're talking about probably isn't press worthy in this landscape. The press that has shrunk, like the opportunities for high quality media coverage is greatly reduced, but at the same time, the owned opportunities have greatly increased. So you gotta access all of it, and you have to tell the same story again and again across all the channels, and also have your internal communication spokespeople, whether it's curators, salespeople, again, nonprofit, for-profit, trustees, patrons. You want everyone telling the same story. So you have to know what the story is, and you have to put it out in a consistent fashion.
How do you manage this is a more personal question. How do you manage the line between the personal and the professional? Because so much of the home that you live in, the traditional art world and its extensions, a lot of it is other people's professional lives, but it's also their personal lives, right? Like collectors do these things out of their pure passion. It's not something that they're doing for a job. Artists, certainly, it's one of the most difficult sort of boundaries because their work is often, very personal to what they do, even though it's a professional thing. The socializing, I mean, if anybody, you're a great follow on social media and on Instagram, because it's like there's no place that you are never not. And every single sort of event that's happening within the art and cultural sphere, someone is going to do a remake of Zelig, and it's Sarah, you're going to be the face that's showing up in the background of world historical events. But it occurs to me that there's a challenge there, because it's like and maybe it's not, but where do you find yourself having the more kind of personal conversations with these friends and colleagues that you've made throughout the years versus allowing this kind of world to be completely subsumed by the professional engagements that are, let's say, the imperatives of your clients and the things that they are looking for and the things that they need?
Sure. For me, the touch point comes back to my kids. I'm a mother of 2 daughters. One's 18, one's almost 22. They're both studying art history. These are art world kids that have grown up in the art world, and that's my groundedness. Those are my roots. I bring them along with me to work things, whether traveling or in whatever city we're in. Wherever I can. They are part of my, they've become sort of part of my work network because they also enjoy it. I mean, oddly, I didn't get the kid that wanted to be the neuroscientist, which that would have been interesting to have a kid who has zero interest in the art world. I didn't get those kids, which feels great. But our home, our quiet time, our holidays, our traditions, those things are super, super important to me, because it is a very social, the art world is very social. In the collecting sphere and the museum going sphere, that's leisure time for people that are participating in those activities. For galleries, they work so incredibly hard going to the art fairs, back to back. Right now we have Frieze and Art Basel in Paris coming up. I will be at both, as will many other of our colleagues. So it really, that's my touch point. And if my kids are good and they're doing okay, then I can go out and do my thing. So that's how I stay grounded. And then a very, very close-knit group of friends, including girlfriends that I met junior year abroad in London, working in Sotheby's auction house as an intern, a very long time ago. So it's nurturing that community, and that's really what's real. I mean, I'm very strong at crisis communications. When a client has a crisis, it's one of my strengths. I've been doing it for 30 years. And somehow that groundedness allows me to go out and manage the most chaotic, brutal, fast moving crisis, because I continue to stay very grounded.
What are the brief follow-up to that? Because I'm very interested in the whole crisis communications landscape, just out of curiosity. So when something erupts, what are the first questions that you are either asking yourself or you are asking the principal who needs your advice?
The first thing is speed. Everyone has to assemble very, very quickly. And the second thing is the truth. What actually is going on and what actually happened. And then, you mobilize quickly from there. Has the crisis already come out? And it's, in the world of X, formerly Twitter and social media, it moves very swiftly. Back to AI, there's a lot of misinformation that can happen. And knowing that there will be an end. Like at some point, the wave will run out of energy and it will end. And so it's just fast assembly, talking points. It's always rooted in the truth. We've entered a crisis where people went a different direction, and then they're trying to clean up, and they weren't truthful from the get-go. And that's a worse problem to have, in fact. So yeah, those are the touch points. Also, working with a seasoned crisis communications person, and I've trained people on my team that, I've trained them how to do this. You have to be able to look out here. What's going to happen? What's coming? You have to be a little bit of a fortune teller, and that's just experience. And again, AI can't replace that. That's, I can do that because I have 30 years of experience, and with my business and my clients, I've weathered 9/11, a pandemic, financial meltdown, crazy individual things that have happened, crime, PETA people, you name it. We've been involved in it, in helping to manage it for our clients. The other critical touch point is remembering how it impacts the people internally. So staff. What's going on with staff? At the end of the day, everyone wants to know how it affects them. And you have to remember that when you're doing crisis communications. It's not just what's happening out here, it's also what's happening internally. Super, super important to remember.
Sara, do you primarily do crisis management for already existing clients, or does somebody come to you when a crisis happens that you've not worked with and they want some help? And follow-on question to that, are you taking a Lisa Schiff reputation management, opportunity in this moment and thinking I can help with that? Or is that, or you look at that and say like, that goose is cooked, and I'm not taking that on.
First questions first. We do crisis communications both for our current, active client portfolio, but also people do call us. And sometimes I never seek out, I don't call people. To me, it's a little akin to ambulance chasing. Like, you look like you're having a crisis. Can we help? I've never done that I can think of. I'm 99% sure I have never done that and never plan to. And sometimes for, in my opinion, it's just, for what I want to be involved in, it's just too late. It's just like, it's too far down the path for me to have any impact. And it's, better left with other people with different skill sets, like legal, legal counsel or whatnot. But, and with our current clients, a lot of it is avoiding a crisis. So anticipating, hang on, what did you just say is being planned? Well, here's what could go wrong with that. One of my rules of thumb, which goes back many years for museums and curators, is don't do shows with live animals. It's not appropriate, and you will have a problem if you do, including, insects and small mammals, and just stay away from it.
It's like the Hollywood rule, right? No children and no animals.
Right.
Sara, was there ever a moment when you were having your own sort of crisis or a challenge or something where you honestly questioned whether FITZ CO was going to survive or continue to succeed?
Certainly after 9/11, it was a really I was running a business in New York. I saw the second plane hit. I watched both with, not on TV, with my own eyes from our apartment downtown. And, there's whoever was in New York then will remember just the world stopped, the world in New York stopped and business stopped. I had employees leave town. I'm not coming back. I'm quitting. I had clients cancel contracts. It was that was I was thinking about compared to the pandemic, that was the worst business cycle we had ever been through. And we just went down to basics and through attrition of employees leaving the city and moving home or quitting or whatever, and the attrition of clients, we just had to go down to the bare minimum and just ride it out. The pandemic was tough, but we were busy. People are like, oh, I took up cooking. I'm like, all I did was crisis communications with my team during the pandemic. How do we navigate this? What should we do? How do we get online? How do we keep, our audiences engaged? How do we continue to sell art? How do we continue to have an art fair? How do we serve our public for nonprofits? It was a really challenging time for my team and I, and we did not get that sort of COVID rest where everything went quiet, which was great because I was able to protect jobs in my agency, also thanks to the PPP and all of that amazing stuff that supported businesses. But we were very, very busy during the pandemic, and it was very stressful and challenging work. I actually loved working from home, and my kids were doing like art history on the laptop during the lunch hour. So that was, we had a cozy kind of setup. We were in LA, luckily, so we didn't feel that trapped in an apartment that many people did. And we were very fortunate that we could walk out. The weather was good year round and all of that. Jonathan, you were there then, I think, too.
Yep.
So from a personal perspective, and luckily my kids didn't go off the rails, and my kids were old enough that they could, my heart went out to working parents with little ones for sure. But the 9/11 was more challenging for us than the pandemic.
Got it.
Sara, so you said you studied art history before you got into PR and what have you. So obviously you have a keen interest in art and an enthusiasm for it. What's been a project either with an artist or like an exhibition or something that just for you personally, for your own art tastes, for your own art interests, just really scratched an itch and that you really loved working on that particular campaign specifically because of the art that was involved in it and your own personal taste?
I don't actually reveal that. I don't share that. That's it, in what I do for my work, for PR for my clients. I don't take a position like that publicly. I don't share, did you love that show? Did you not like that show? Do you like that artist? Do you not like it? It's not my place. Our job is to develop a strategy to move from A to B with a destination in the navigation system and to support our clients. And whether, it's, an artist or a show that we love or that we like less, it doesn't matter. That's not one of the criteria. I will share and reveal, however, that I'm on the board of the Public Art Fund. Truly, one of my personal passions is art in public places and art in nature. So we've had the privilege of working with Storm King Art Center. Exquisite art experience, just so exquisite being in art and nature. Being on the board of the Public Art Fund, seeing families and kids and people walking down the street interact with art and not necessarily even really knowing what it is, but interacting and asking questions and communing around art, that does bring me great joy. On a personal level, whether it's at Doris Friedman Plaza or Brooklyn Bridge Park or City Hall Park or, other places around the city. I'm a huge believer in public art and the power of public art in the public realm, and art in nature.
Nice. I feel like if I asked you, so which is your favorite child?
Exactly.
Well, I was going to say that we'll probably have to interview your daughters at some point to get the real answers
The
about,
real story.
yeah, the real story.
Exactly.
Sounds like at some point down the future for the inevitable biography.
Exactly.
The art in public places things. I was just out with my own children yesterday up in the Bay Area, and was having a conversation about how a untapped potential big win is having artists involved in designing, producing playgrounds and playground equipment more readily, because it's one of these things that, you know, you go to when you've got school age kids that spend time in these places and you see the families. It's a constantly renewing audience, and it's, you know, over time it's pretty conventional, it's pretty repetitious. And if, you know, you could get artists involved with designers and make sure that all the regulations are being followed, everything, but there's a huge win to be had there in terms of making a, you know, a climbable, playable sculpture art park environment. And the more artists that did that, the more, you know, both goodwill and satisfaction I think one would find to be involved with.
It makes me think of the Public Art Fund's presentation of Yepa Hine at Brooklyn Bridge Park, which in a way was that. I think it was called Please Touch the Art.
Yeah.
And it was so fun and joyful. And Yepa is such an incredible human being and a visionary artist. And a lot of his practice is, you know, is at the end of the day, it's rooted in sort of positive mental health and positive experiences. And that show to me is so incredibly memorable, and probably to my kids too. They were 8 and 10 maybe, or 10 and 12, something like that, when that show was on. And you're right, Jonathan, that like it's a way to pull in kids and families into that art experience.
Absolutely.
I've got one more question, Sarah, before we go to the more opinions. Who's been your greatest, you know, both from a maybe PR knowledge standpoint, but also just business in general? Like who have been maybe some of your greatest mentors?
I think having a community of, in my case, it's been a community of women of a similar age. I wouldn't say that there's one, but there are many, and just trustworthy sounding boards that you can be vulnerable with. You know, in business and in PR, certainly, being vulnerable is not particularly helpful. And so to have a community, even if it's just a handful, 2 or 3 is enough, of people that you can go and say, you know, am I doing the right thing? Can I bounce this off of you? That's truly invaluable. And I try to pay that forward as well. So I've had, you know, a handful of women like that in my life, and continue to. And I think for women that are a little bit younger than me, some of them have reflected back that I have been a role model for them about how to be a working mom who, you know, does it all, has it all. That doesn't exist. I can disabuse you of that. But you know, being able to work up and down the generations too, to support, in my case, you know, younger women or men who are having families and have to balance, you know, the art world schedule is grueling. There's a lot of travel. I missed a lot of things away from my kids, and you know, had to come up with supplemental childcare. I don't live somewhere where family is close by. So being supportive of people who are dealing with that is super important to me.
Has that ever been a formalized group, or these are just, you know, people in your inner circle, or did you ever have kind of a mastermind sort of group of women that you know, met with or anything like that, or is...
Very ad hoc. No, not formal, very, very ad hoc.
Got it. All right. Well, let's do the more opinions. So we have 3 questions we like to ask at the end of the show. I think we warn you about one of them because it's sometimes hard to think of it off the cuff, but we'll go with the first one, which is if somebody gave you $10 million to embark on a new project or enterprise that could not be FITZ Co., what would you like to do if you had a nice big budget to try something else?
That was not, did you say that was the one that was on the list?
No, that's not the one on the list.
That wasn't on my list. Something that would get kids turned on to art earlier. I think the lack of arts education in our schools and for our young people is just not acceptable in the US. That kids don't feel comfortable walking into a museum, that they don't think that being an arts worker is even on their radar, that it is this elitist thing. That really doesn't sit well with me. I think getting kids into art spaces young and getting comfortable there and having those conversations, especially today, the level of absorption in iPads and iPhones in little tiny kids is we're going to have a real problem coming up. That's a different conversation, but those kids aren't going to be able to go into a museum and pay attention. It's too boring. And there is something important about slowing down, using your imagination, thinking, talking, connecting ideas, problem solving. How did the artist do that? What do you see? What do you see? Valuing different opinions. It is just vitally important, and it's missing, and it's also being replaced with devices. I was in the Musée d'Orsay last Art Basel Paris, and there was a mom pushing a stroller with two little kids. One was probably 2 and one was 3. They were laying flat on their backs in the stroller in the museum, both holding iPads. Like, this is a problem. That's a choice that mother made, of course, and no criticism, maybe a little bit, but it has become the babysitter. But back to your question, getting kids into artistic spaces, having them know that they can walk into a gallery and it's free and it's open to them, and making them feel welcome, and being able to see and talk art, and know that there's the opportunity for employment in that space as well, or encouraging them, if they are artistic, you could become an artist. That's what I would do with $10 million.
I'm going to say it's okay to criticize French mothers in particular, because they've exported this sensibility that somehow they managed to do it much better than the rest of the world for a long time. And so there's a real snobbishness about having your 4-year-old smoking a cigarette, talking about new wave cinema, and We don't
know that mother was French, however.
Yeah, oh, it's true. Well, maybe.
I didn't hear what language they were watching. Whatever, Pokemon.
Yeah.
So on a personal level, I love that use of the $10 million. As a kid, every minute of my day I spent drawing, and every teacher I ever had told me, you're so talented, you're going to be able to do whatever you want, in these like ambiguous terms that did not lead to me understanding what the world of opportunity was in art. Like, nobody ever talked to me about going to art school. Nobody ever explained to me all these different career paths you could take. And I ended up with not a career in art until 4 years ago, when I met Jonathan. Yep. and we embarked on this. I think I would have probably loved to be some sort of professional artist, but literally no one in high school or anywhere else ever sat down and explained to me that there are graphic designers, there are fine artists, there are commercial artists, there's this. Yep. They just kept telling me you could do anything. And there was just no practical advice or awareness, I think, for people like me about, how can you take this thing that you're so passionate about and make a life out of it or a career out of it. So I think it's tremendously important and definitely missing, no question.
Agreed.
Okay, question number 2, and this is the one that we gave you some prep on, and I hope it will not be one of your clients, but what is a project in the art world, or a person doing something in the art world that you're really excited about, and that you wanted to maybe bring some attention to?
Sure. Thank you for sharing that ahead of time because I did give it some thought. I was going to talk about the digital art world, but I'm doing so much work in that space that I felt it was disqualified. In thinking about it, I was thinking about transformation because the digital art world is a space of transformation. So who else is creating transformation? And of note, I think in Saudi Arabia, the investment in culture is just extraordinary. And I think it's contributing to transformation from the Diriyah Biennial to Desert X in Alula to the new museum coming to Alula for contemporary art, partnerships with Western museums like the Centre Pompidou, galleries in the ecosystem. This is our client, but Ather Gallery, I think, is doing incredible work in the region. And it's a true cultural renaissance that I think is transforming not only Saudi, but also, are we frozen? No, we're okay. Not only transforming Saudi, but it's also redefining the entire region's artistic landscape. It's a super ambitious vision. It's preserving heritage, but also driving cross-cultural understanding and opening up avenues for artistic exploration. It's pretty interesting. The investment in architecture, in art and artists, and in residencies and foundations. It's quite extraordinary, and that kind of capital being put to use for artistic creation and artistic presentation is quite unprecedented and may not ever happen again anywhere else.
Interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. It's certainly one of the more watched scenarios because I think also in a kind of larger geopolitical context, it is a significant investment in both the local cultural and arts infrastructure, but in a time that is also fundamentally global and creating these networks. And let's say for a state that is about which many people have very ambivalent feelings when it both politically and socially, is a interesting experiment to be watching how that's going to play out long run. And it feels very promising, but also very fragile. And hope that it continues apace.
Agreed. I think it's a extremely interesting case study to watch.
Yeah. We have some friends who are architects. There are a number of architecture firms. This is where the lens that I've been watching through, but a lot of it has become one of the primary destinations for both established as well as newer entrants into the kind of advanced architectural field, being able to do some very, very interesting work. So whereas that had been China for maybe a decade, for a while, now it does seem like Saudi is the place where architects are finding the funding as well as the free rein to be able to do some pretty impressive work.
Yeah, super visionary architectural projects happening there.
Yeah. All right, last question, Joey.
Last question, here we go. Sara, if you could steal or have any work of art in the world for you to personally enjoy at home, but no one could ever know that you took it, so it's not for showing off, but only for enjoying personally, what piece of art would you like to have?
Probably a major piece of Baroque art. I studied 17th century Italian Baroque, and that really is what got me into the world of art, and what excited me so much was the object as storyteller of history. How does it capture that moment? I'd have to think longer than we have about which exact piece, but something really major and mind-blowing from that period. That is a period of art that I just absolutely love. I love spending time at the Uffizi and in Rome and Naples and seeing all of those works. And I drag my family and they're like, can we go now? And I'm like, I have like an hour left on the tour. So that would be it. And I keep it hidden away and, maybe under a cloth, and I would just go sit with it and, do my meditation, and get really grounded and just enjoy it in private for me. I'll get back to you on which artist. I have to think. There's too many.
I like the idea that you have a Bernini, like a Bernini sculpture. You could have like the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa or something like that sitting in your backyard, and people would come by and wouldn't recognize it's a real thing. They just assume it's a copy, and you just can pass it off as an artifice.
Exactly. Like it.
I was just in Europe with my family, and I was walking with my sister, and I forget, we were looking at some old Renaissance, just these huge massive paintings and people battling with demons and all this stuff, and she's like, yeah, this stuff is amazing, but this isn't anything I would want in my house. And we turned the corner, and there was one that fell in that same kind. I was like, I would 100% put that in my house. That thing is just remarkable. So yeah, I think it would be a lot of fun to have something that dominating to look at.
I love the question too.
Yeah, no, it's gotten some really fun answers. The question keeps evolving. It used to be, what would you steal? And we had a couple of people who just, of course, wanted the most expensive thing that they could take, but we changed it to where no one could ever know. So it's got to be about what you personally want to enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. I love it.
We had to modify it for our last guest, who wrote an entire book about cultural heritage and plunder. Has a little bit of a different political dynamic when you're talking to somebody like that. Excellent.
Sarah, thank you for coming on the pod. Appreciate it. Amazing stories, and I'm sure our audience, this is one I think they're going to be very, very tuned into. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Joey. And Jonathan, thank you. It's always good to see you, and I appreciate you thinking of me and including me with this amazing cohort.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you for your time, and best of luck for the weeks to come, which I know are going to be busy, and we'll see you back in California.
Sounds great. Be well, guys. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.